Breaking news, and I mean earth-shattering news. A British monarch just walked into Parliament and ended a Prime Minister's career in under 5 minutes. No warning, no tradition, no ceremony, just raw authority erupting in the middle of the House of Commons. This is the moment every MP will remember for the rest of their lives, and the moment historians will talk about for the next 100 years. So let me take you inside that room, inside the most shocking political confrontation Britain has seen since the days of kings with actual power. Because what you're about to hear is not politics. It's a royal detonation. The moment that shook Westminster. Parliament was halfway through a routine session. Boring, predictable, MPs whispering, scrolling, yawning, the usual weekday sleepwalk. Then it happened. The chamber doors didn't open. They burst. Every head snapped around. Every conversation died mid-sentence. And there he was, King Charles III, walking straight down the aisle. Without an announcement, without permission, without hesitation. He moved like a man carrying centuries on his shoulders. The same cold, unreadable expression he wore at his mother's funeral. Phones came out instantly. MPs froze. Even conservative backbenchers, usually thrilled by chaos, sat rigid. But the person who reacted the fastest? Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Witnesses swear his jaw locked the second he realized what he was seeing. They said he looked like someone had poured ice water down his spine. Charles didn't glance left, didn't glance right. He walked with absolute, unstoppable purpose until he stopped just 3 feet from the Prime Minister. And then, with a voice that sounded like stone cracking, "Prime Minister, you have tested my patience." The chamber didn't fall silent. It collapsed into silence. You could hear someone swallow in the gallery. You could hear papers shifting on desks. You could hear hearts pounding. Then Charles reached into his coat and pulled out something no one expected. A folded document, sealed with deep crimson royal wax. The kind only used when the Crown issues a final warning. MPs leaned so far forward you'd think they were trying to read the wax itself. Starmer's hands tightened on the dispatch box until his knuckles turned ghost white. Then the king opened that letter and invoked a constitutional clause so old, so obscure that most MPs didn't even know it existed. A clause allowing the monarch to intervene if the government threatens the stability of the realm. Some MPs gasped. Others looked physically ill. But Charles wasn't done. He lifted his head and delivered the line now, plastered across every screen in Britain. Parliament is not above the Crown. Parliament exists because the Crown allows it. The chamber detonated. Chaos doesn't begin to describe what happened next. MPs shot out of their seats like someone had fired a starting pistol. Some shouted. Some pointed. Some actually stepped backward as if the king had physically struck the Prime Minister. But Charles, he stayed completely still, the eye of a political hurricane. And Starmer, well, this is the moment everything inside him seemed to crack. He tried to speak. Witnesses swear the first thing that came out of his mouth wasn't a word. It was air, like his voice had forgotten how to exist. Finally, he forced out, "Your Majesty, this is highly irregular." But Charles cut him off with a single gesture. Not a grand gesture, not a royal flourish. Just a small, sharp flick of the hand. The same motion you'd use to silence a child misbehaving at dinner. And instantly the room obeyed. Even MPs, who hated the monarchy, suddenly looked like schoolchildren about to be scolded. The royal accusation. Charles lifted the letter again, letting the crimson seal catch the lights above. The room dimmed slightly as clouds passed outside, and for a moment the king looked like a silhouette carved from old marble. Then he spoke. "Prime Minister, you have allowed this government to drift toward instability. You have tested the trust of the people and of the Crown." A ripple went through the chamber. You could almost feel the oxygen thinning. Starmer swallowed hard. This is an elected parliament. The Crown does not interfere. Charles didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "The Crown," he said quietly, "intervenes only when it must protect the integrity of the nation from within." MPs looked at each other, eyes wide. That line hit like a thunderclap. From within. Was the king accusing the Prime Minister of threatening the country? Some MPs glanced toward the exits. Others whispered urgently into phones. One backbencher reportedly muttered, "Oh God, he's doing it." He's actually doing it. The unthinkable move. Then Charles stepped closer, just one step, but it felt like a seismic shift. He placed the letter on the dispatch box, inches from Starmer's trembling hand. "Read it," Charles commanded. Not asked, not suggested, commanded. Starmer hesitated, and in that hesitation, you could see the entire power dynamic of the United Kingdom flip upside down. When he finally opened the letter, his face drained of color. Because inside that folded parchment was something no modern Prime Minister had ever been handed. A document with only 7 words. Your position is no longer tenable. Charles R. The chamber erupted. The shouting hit like an explosion. Not organized debate, not political theater, but raw panic disguised as outrage. Some MPs leapt to their feet, screaming that this was unconstitutional. Others demanded Starmer respond immediately. A few simply stared at the king, unable to process what centuries of tradition had just allowed to happen. But Charles, he stood perfectly still, watching the chaos unfold. Around him like a man observing a forest. Fire he had already accepted cannot be stopped. Meanwhile, Starmer clutched the letter with both hands, knuckles white, as if tightening his grip could somehow change the words written on the page. The Prime Minister breaks. For a moment he just stood there, gaze darting from the king to the MPs to the press gallery, as though desperately scanning for an escape route that didn't exist. Finally, voice cracking, he croaked, This cannot be done. No monarch can dismiss an elected Prime Minister." Charles didn't look at him. He simply raised his chin slightly, addressing the entire chamber instead. "Prime Minister," he said, "you misunderstand. I have not dismissed you." A wave of confusion rippled through the room. Then Charles delivered the second blow. "You have dismissed yourself through actions unbefitting your office." Gasps. Actual gasps. The kind people make when watching a horror film, not a parliamentary session. Starmer blinked rapidly, his forehead shining under the lights. "What actions?" "I've done nothing." But Charles cut across him with the icy precision of a scalpel. "You have misled those who entrusted you with power. You have placed personal certainty above national stability. You have broken confidence, mine and the people's." Every MP leaned forward. This wasn't a political dispute anymore. This was a dismantling. The evidence on the table. Then Charles did something no one expected. He gestured toward a royal aide standing near the entrance. The aide stepped forward and placed a thick binder onto the dispatch box with a heavy thud. Starmer froze. He recognized that binder. Everyone did. It was the type of document only, circulated among the highest levels of government, internal reports, private briefings, warnings no public eye had ever seen. Charles tapped it lightly. "These," he said, "are the assessments of your ministers, your advisors, your own civil service." Quietly submitted, quietly ignored. Starmer shook his head. "This is madness." "No," Charles replied softly. "It is accountability." The moment that changed everything. Then Charles leaned in, voice low enough that only those closest could hear. Yet somehow the entire chamber fell silent. "You have lost the confidence of the nation. And when a prime minister loses that, the crown must speak." The room froze. Because everyone knew the king had just crossed the line that wasn't supposed to exist. You could feel the temperature in the chamber drop, not physically, but emotionally, as if the king's words had sucked all remaining warmth from the air. Starmer stood rooted to the spot, his mouth slightly open, the letter trembling in his grip. It wasn't just humiliation, it was disbelief, shock so deep it left him looking like he'd forgotten how to breathe. He finally managed to whisper, "You have no authority to say that." But Charles did not flinch. In fact, he stepped forward, closing the distance, until he stood directly opposite the Prime Minister, with only the dispatch box between them. His voice was calm, measured, straight from a man who knew exactly what he was doing. "The public looks to you for certainty," Charles said. "But all you have offered them is fear, hesitation, division." A few MPs exchanged glances, uneasy. They weren't sure if they agreed, but in that moment, agreement didn't matter. Only the king's presence did. Charles pressed on. When a leader governs without trust, they no longer lead, they merely occupy space. The line struck the room like a hammer. The king's final decree. Then, in a move no one saw coming, Charles extended his hand, not to Starmer, but toward the Speaker of the House. "Madam Speaker," he declared, "the Crown advises that a motion of no confidence be tabled immediately." The chamber erupted again, louder, more chaotic, more frantic than before. Some MPs jumped up shouting protests. Others roared their approval. A few simply stared at the king as if witnessing history crack open. Starmer's face went pale. This wasn't just symbolic. This wasn't theater. This was a direct trigger. A pressure point pressed with royal force. "You can't do this," he stammered. "You're interfering in government." But Charles only turned his eyes toward him, and with chilling finality said, "I am not interfering. I am reminding this house of its duty." Silence. A deep, heavy silence that made the fluorescent lights buzz louder than the MPs. And then, The Speaker rose, slowly, gravely, like someone carrying the weight of the Constitution on her shoulders. In light of His Majesty's concerns, she announced, "This House will move to schedule an immediate debate on a motion of no confidence." The words felt unreal, as if spoken in a dream. Starmer stared ahead, hollow-eyed, his future collapsing in real time. Charles stepped back toward the aisle, the crowd parting around him. He paused, looked directly at Starmer, and delivered the final blow. A leader's power does not come from their title, but from the trust they keep. You have lost that trust. And with that, King Charles turned and walked out of Parliament, leaving behind a nation stunned, an institution shaken, and a Prime Minister whose political fate had just been sealed.